Good evening. I'm Jackie Yamanaka here at Yellowstone Public Radio with Jim Gransberry, and we're back once again tonight to bring you more of our election special programming. Tonight, it's a lieutenant governor candidates, who are here, both of them in our studio tonight. I'm calling it a debate, but really it's a more relaxed atmosphere. This is radio after all. And we encourage you to also participate by asking a question on the issues, please. And you can do that 657-2941 in Billings, 1-800-441-2941. You can also email your question during this program. We're going to be on for the next hour approximately. We are going to give the candidates 2 minutes toward the end of the program to deliver closing remarks and address anything that they would like to bring up that was not asked by either me or Jim or you, the listener. So, with that, welcome again, gentlemen. John, Steve.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Glad to be with you.
For coming in. I'd like to start off with just a brief introduction for the two of you, because this is your opportunity really to meet the two lieutenant governor candidates on the air, that is, and to compare and contrast them and their running mate, quite frankly. I'd like to welcome John Bohlinger. He's the current lieutenant governor. The Republican was elected on the ticket with Democrat Brian Schweitzer in 2004. No, I did not misspeak. I will let him explain later. The former Marine has a degree in business from the University of Montana. For over 3 decades, he was a small businessman here in Billings. John is also a former legislator. He was first elected in 1992 to 3 terms in the Montana House, and he recently resigned his Senate seat when he took office as lieutenant governor. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Glad to be with you and with your audience.
We'd also like to welcome Steve Daines. He's the running mate of Republican gubernatorial candidate and Billings State Senator Roy Brown, and Steve graduated with a degree in chemical engineering from Montana State University. That's where the partisan part comes in. One is a cat and one is a grizz.
It could turn into a cat-grizz war right here, Jackie.
Right here.
We're going to move the furniture then.
Did Jim bring his referee cards?
Not tonight.
Okay.
I could make one up. I got some yellow paper here.
Okay. And to continue on, Steve, during your career with Procter & Gamble, you worked overseas in Hong Kong and China before coming back to Montana to take a job as vice president of Right Now Technologies based in Bozeman. And this is his first run for public office. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks much, Jackie.
Like I said, we're going to be somewhat informal here tonight, gentlemen. I have to, begin this conversation and ask the both of you. You come from successful careers in the private sector. So why in the world would you want to run for public office, lieutenant governor at that?
Well,
John,
who wants to start?
Well, who wants to start here?
Well, I've had a keen interest in politics for many years. I was one of those kids who in school was a member of the student council and a class officer. And so I grew up in a family that was politically aware. We used to sit around the dining room table and discuss politics. I really feel that having a seat at the table where public policy is formed is probably the most important job that I've ever had. Yes, I had a 33-year career as a small businessman, but after my children had left home and I had sold my business, I was able to run for office. Glad to have that opportunity because it's where public policy is shaped, and I still want a seat at the table. I think that's an opportunity to give back and to be a part of the future. So I'm very pleased to have this chance, and we're hopeful that the people of Montana will say you've done a good job. We're signing you up for 4 more years. So we wait for the final. The final exam is in November, and like any nervous and anxious student, we're ready.
Steve.
Well, Jackie's a good question. I'm a 5th-generation Montanan. My family roots go back to the Conrad Brady area north of Great Falls. Some Norwegians that came out and settled in Montana. And Cindy and I have 4 children. And oftentimes when you think about public service, it's really about the future. Elections are about the future. The decision for John to get into public service and myself is about looking down the road. And so we entered this because we believe there's a lot we can bring to help in the high calling, I believe, of public service, of serving people. I also think it's a good thing for public servants to have some private sector experience, some real-world experiences with around the kitchen table, creating jobs, living in Montana, and then being able to eventually serve the people of Montana. But I'll tell you one thing. When Roy Brown asked me to run with him, I told him, I said, Roy, I've got the best job in Montana today in terms of creating jobs in Bozeman, Montana, and running a global company there. I said, if it's going to be cutting ribbons and going to funerals, I don't want the job. But if we can really do something meaningful here to really improve the efficiency and effectiveness of government and drive the economy, I'm all in. And so that's what he said, and that's why we're in this race.
Before I go to our first caller here, I want to follow up and ask you, Steve, I'll let you start first since John answered first last time. Why should Montanans care about who is elected lieutenant governor?
Well, it's very, very important. They care for who's elected lieutenant governor as well as governor, because we do run as one ticket. Many states, it's a separate race. In this state, you run as a governor, lieutenant governor. But it's the executive branch of government. It is really driving the effectiveness and efficiency of government, and it's very important that we have leaders who are in touch with the real needs of people in the state, and are ensuring that tax dollars that we're paying to Helena are being spent responsibly and in the best interest of its people.
John.
Well, I believe people should care because, we're going to have government with or without someone's vote. I would like to think that it is a government of our choosing, not one that's imposed upon us. So I would encourage all to become engaged. I believe that the executive branch of government is the one that gets to set the agenda. They're the ones that the governor will propose a budget. He will establish an agenda for the coming legislative session, and it's an opportunity to show leadership. It's an opportunity to bring forward an agenda, and ours is one of creating jobs and providing opportunity for Montanans. And so, we say that's what we're about, and we're eager to have another opportunity to serve in that capacity.
Okay, let's go to our first caller. Scott is on the line from Lolo, and I understand he wants to talk about the sales tax. Hello, Scott?
Hey, I have just a real quick question for Mr. Daines. I know you were a big supporter of Mike Huckabee during the Republican primary race earlier this year, and in that campaign, Mr. Huckabee supported a national sales tax, a tax that would, add a 23% tax on everything you buy. And I'm wondering, Mr. Daines, if you support that. I mean, the last thing I want to see is, a 23% tax on, gasoline or a truck or a rifle or anything like that.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. There's two ways to know if you are a native Montanan. The first is if you were born here, and the second is if you've voted against a sales tax twice.
That's good.
That's good.
And so, the Constitution prohibits any sales tax greater than 4%. Montanans are wary of growth in government. They're wary that when government creates more taxes, they know they'll never get replaced, and government just grows and our pocketbooks shrink. So let me just say, I don't support a sales tax because the people of Montana don't support a sales tax at the moment. And it's been a long battle in our state, and I think there's other things to work on right now that we can effectively change, and barking up the sales tax tree right now in Montana is not one of them.
Well,
John.
Yes. Well, let me say this. Governor Schweitzer has clearly stated his opposition to a sales tax. In fact, he's stated his opposition to any kind of tax increase. And this term in office during the past 3.5 years, he has opposed any attempt to raise taxes. He will not support a sales tax, and I'm part of that team, so I stand in opposition to that also.
Jim.
Well, I find this very, very interesting because Montanans, yes, they have. In fact, it's probably a genetic distaste for sales taxes in Montana. And yet, I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. Properly structured, a sales tax could reduce other taxes, and it also would bring into play people who are not now supporting government or schools or whatever would have a piece of the action, if you will, by having to pay a sales tax. And I honestly do believe that a total reform of Montana's entire tax system could include a sales tax and at the same time reduce property taxes and actually in the long run maybe provide us with more revenue to which we could apply to such things as the university systems. So I can freely take that stand because I'm not running for anything, but that's an honest opinion which I have held for a long time. And if you all wish to respond, you may.
John.
Well, I do have a public record. I was a member of the Montana House of Representatives for 3 terms. I was elected to 2 terms of the Senate. And in the 2001 session of the Senate, I did bring forward a general sales tax bill. It was non-regressive in the sense that it didn't tax groceries or pharmaceuticals or thrift store purchases. It dropped from state income taxes. Anyone whose adjusted gross income was $17,000 a year or less. For the other wage earners in the state, it reduced their income taxes by 25% and their property taxes by 25%. And in spite of those givebacks, the Department of Revenue estimated that it would have generated $80 million a year in new revenue, structured in such a way that it would ask the 10 million plus visitors that come to Montana to participate in the cost of government. They come with the full expectation of police protection and fire protection. They recreate in our parks. We clean up after them, and we say no charge. I was able to move that bill through the Senate. It was killed in the House. Understanding the people of Montana's opposition to a sales tax, I, in spite of the good intentions, and we certainly had need for additional revenue in that 2003 session. The governor will not support a sales tax, so that is a dead issue.
Steve.
Jim, it's you look at this issue of tourism in our state, and how do we share that the tax burden that we bear as natives here with the tourism industry? And I mean, there's an avenue with resort tax and so forth today that can be enacted that can target that. I think there's just a general mistrust of most Montanans, despite the nice charts and the algebra that can be used to suggest that our tax burden at the end of the day would go down. Experience around the country suggests it doesn't. And I think we should, in Montana, be rightfully skeptical whenever the government's looking to increase ways to tax us.
Well, we're more than skeptical. We have a constitutional limit on a sales tax that doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, we did. As I mentioned, we have a cap of 4%. You think about where we're at in Montana. How many states have a sales tax? Well, most of them except about 3 or 4. And then we already have a 4% cap in the Constitution's amendment. So I think
we don't
I tell you, I think we should move on. There's probably bigger fish to fry in this one. I think this would be a tough hill to climb because the people of Montana have been very vocal on it.
Certainly. And in case you've just joined us and are wondering what happened to the regularly scheduled programming, you are listening to a Lieutenant Governor debate, small d, here on Yellowstone Public Radio between 2 Republicans, Steve Daines and John Bohlinger. And if you have a question, you can certainly give us a call at 657-2941, 1-800-441-2941. John, did you want to follow up?
I was just going to offer this, Jackie. I really question the need for the state of Montana to generate more revenue through taxation. We have an expanding economy. We have more taxpayers than at any other period in time. We are generating more revenue through the extractive industries. We just don't need the additional revenue. So,
no, you were talking, I remember during that debate, I mean, I know Montana's tax system has been described as a 2-legged stool.
Yes.
And your description is we wanted to add a 3rd leg for stability.
Yes.
Well, my concern, to John's point, though, is boy, I'd be scared to send more revenue to Helena because they'll find a way to spend it. They demonstrated that in the last legislative session.
Right, and I know the other skepticism was that, promises that property taxes, for example, would go down, but homeowners were skeptical that that would happen either on the state level or particularly at the local level, because when voters are presented with, well, do you want to continue Meals on Wheels for seniors? Do you want to have a new library for your local school, et cetera, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, on the spending issue, too, we saw the single largest spending increase in 4 years we've had in the history of the state of Montana. So, I'm afraid to send more revenue to Helena right now because I know what happens to it as it gets spent.
John, I can't let you, before I move on.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you for providing me a lead in, Steve. I really question the term of the use of this expansion of government. It's interesting that you would include in those numbers of expenditures such things as the $95 million that was given to homeowners in the form of a $400 check. We were authorized to give $100 million. We gave $95 million. We also put $100 million into our public employee retirement system. It was actuarially unsound. It was underwater. We could not meet a moral and legal obligation to fund a public employee retirement. In addition, we had a $50 million investment into our colleges that froze tuition, which was saving students that additional $50 million. We spent $25 million to repeal the water tax for the adjudication of water rights. Had we not done that, the farmers and ranchers would have had to pay that money. We spent $15 million for the unemployment insurance fund, which again was underwater. We had to do that. We also established a $125 million rainy day savings account. I really don't think of this as an expenditure. Expenditure in the sense that we took money from the general fund and moved it to another account within government. And so, in addition, we spent about $195 million to build buildings on the various campuses of this great state, the University of Montana, or Montana State University in Bozeman. Gaines Hall was built with cash, not by bonding it. We paid for it. We also paid for the IT updates in Helena. About $50 million was spent there. These are transfers of funds, and I think it reflects prudent management, and there has been a payoff in the sense that both Moody's and Fisk and Standard & Poor's have said, because of such good fiscal management, we're going to improve your bond rating. And it's because of a good bond rating that people have confidence in this state's economy.
Steve.
Yeah, it's we can list all the projects that we spent tax dollars to grow the government. But I think the bigger picture here is we walked into a situation with somewhere between a $1.1 and $1.4 billion budget surplus. It was the largest surplus in the history of the state of Montana. It was the largest surplus in the United States as a percentage of total budget spent. California was running a $1 billion surplus, but they spend $100 billion a year in their budgets. Montana had a surplus in excess of $1 billion, and we're annually spending less than $2 billion. So I know, and I respect John and his view. In fact, I don't have as many issues with John as I do his boss, Frank. We'll talk about that a little later on. But John's view of it and Brian Schweitzer's view of it is surpluses are created because we didn't spend enough. Roy Brown's and Steve Daines' view of it, surpluses are created because government collected too much. And that's just a fundamental philosophical difference.
Okay.
Well, may I respond to that?
I want to raise a point that for Mr. Daines to address in this context. Had the Republican tax relief plan been enacted by the last legislature, would not the rules of the legislative fiscal division also would have required that tax break to be accounted for as government spending.
Yeah, well, let me, and I think John brings a fair point. The $95 million of tax relief, take that off the table, is still about a 38% tax spending increase. So take that out. I think that's fair enough to look at it. But you take that out, it's still the largest spending increase in the history of Montana. But if you look at what the fiscal division said when they presented the budget, when the governor presented his budget, and I quote from the governor's and fiscal division's own document, it says, "What is striking about the governor's proposal is not only the size, but the breadth of the increases and initiatives. The smallest general fund increase for any executive agency is over 10%. Even the legislative fiscal division was wondering how big this budget was that came to the floor. It reminds me of my teenage kids. We have 4 children, 3 teenagers. If I give them a couple $100s in their pocket and they head to the mall, I guarantee it gets spent very, very quickly. And that's what happens when you put $1 billion into Helena. The taxpayer got 10 cents on the dollar or less, and the rest of it got spent.
I'm going to give you one chance to respond.
Very good.
To rebut, John, and then I'm going to go to a caller who's been waiting very patiently. Okay?
You know, the $1 billion budget surplus came about not because we raised anybody's taxes. Taxes were not raised. It came about because we have more taxpayers. We've been growing jobs at the rate of about 1,300 a month since we've taken office. 56,000 new taxpayers have come on the tax rolls. We have increased oil production by 40%. We have increased coal production by 40%. We have more sources of revenue than ever before. Montana is not overtaxed. The personal tax burden for individual taxpayers, that's counting state and local taxes, places us 10th in this country. That means 40 states have a higher individual tax burden than Montanans. The business tax in Montana places us at number 6. That means 44 states have a greater tax burden than we in Montana. So we are not overtaxed. I feel overtaxed, yes. When I get my property tax statement, I think, how can this be? But, the money did not come because we overtaxed people.
We're going to actually stick on the topic of taxes because Stan is on the line from Miles City, and he has a question about property taxes. Stan, thank you for your patience.
Oh, yes, thank you, and thank you for having this.
Yes, your question for the lieutenant governor candidates.
Yeah, it has to do with Mr. Buck's issue of the last legislature, and Mr. Bucks is in charge of the Montana
Department of Revenue.
Department of Revenue, thank you. And the issue was the collection of property taxes from out-of-state property owners who happen to sell a piece of Montana property and then fail to pay willingly the property taxes. And I think the issue was the state proposed that before they collected their money for the property, that the taxes would be removed, and that failed. Can each of you address that issue? Thank you.
Thank you.
I certainly can. Do you want to go first?
Go ahead, John.
Well, I was going to say Mr. Daines should go first this time because you've been jumping in a little too quick.
I want to be polite. I'll take my turn.
Well, I mean, clearly there's an issue of fairness and equity when you talk about the issue of property taxes and people who leave the state. And I mean, we have more and more people moving to Montana who want to come in for the same reasons that John and I grew up here, why I went to kindergarten through college in Bozeman. It's a beautiful place. People want to build their second homes. But, the bottom line is those who may only be part-time residents and selling homes, they should be paying their fair share of tax. That's the right thing to do. And I don't see why there should be any reason why they should have any loopholes or ability to get out of paying their fair share of taxes.
Stan, yours is a good question. I had a front row seat for this whole debate. I, of course, was very supportive of Director Dan Bucks's proposal that would provide additional revenue to hire more people in the Department of Revenue so that we could not only assess but collect the taxes from those out-of-state property owners who sell property in Montana. We didn't have the ability to collect that money to go after them, And it is on a volunteer basis. I mean, if your conscience would lead you to pay the tax, they would pay the tax, but most of them don't. And unfortunately, we didn't have enough votes to move that bill through the process, so it died. Hopefully, it will be brought up again, because for the out-of-stater not to pay his fair share means that we Montanans have to pay more than our fair share, and that's not right.
Just for a point of clarification, is this tax a capital gains tax on the sale of property? It wasn't an income tax.
No, sir.
No.
Capital gains.
We were trying to collect the appropriate capital gains tax on those sales.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes. Angie is on the line from Billings, and I understand she has a question on the outsourcing of labor.
Sure. My question is mostly for Mr. Daines. I know that you and the Lieutenant Governor are both businessmen. Mr. Bohlinger ran a clothing company store in Billings for years. And I don't know much about your company, but I've heard some people say that it's involved in outsourcing and setting up call centers to Asia. And I was just wondering if that's true.
Well, thanks for the question. That's not true. The company I work for is called Right Now Technologies, located in Bozeman, Montana. We started virtually at zero and grew to 800 employees over the last 10 years. It's been called one of the Montana miracles. 400 of those employees we have are located in Bozeman. We're the largest commercial employer in Bozeman, and yet we also have offices in 15 places around the United States. We also have offices in Tokyo and Sydney and London and so forth. So it's exciting to grow, to work every day in Bozeman and run a global company. But what we sell to our customers is a software solution that is primarily deployed to about 75% to American companies who have American contact centers. Some of them have contact centers around the world, but primarily it's for U.S. operations. We have some European operations and a small presence in Asia.
We have had at least three questions that have been submitted via email. John from Helena, Eileen from Bozeman, and Bev from Stevensville. And they all basically are asking the same question. How would you address Montana's non-existent consumer protection laws, especially in the building trades? The sole recourse in Montana is for the consumer to sue the builder and hope for the best. And they want to know, what are you going to do to provide consumer protection again for Montanans?
Well, we have, through our Department of Labor and Industry, a resource in government that is in place to protect the consumer. We have laws on the books, and we have people that are there to enforce them. I'm not aware of a violation of consumer protection laws, but if any of you three or anyone out there in this audience would write me at my office, give me a specific case, and I will have it investigated. You can reach me just at John Bohlinger, Montana Lieutenant Governor, State Capitol, and I would be happy to have an investigation performed to find out just what is not being done and what we can do about it.
Steve?
Yeah, I think I need to follow the appropriate recourse there with the officials. I also would suggest, too, that, and I'm one who grew up in the trades. I used to push the north end of a broom going south myself, drive dump trucks going up in summer jobs. But there's some other great organizations out there, like the Association of Home Builders around the state, that do police those organizations and make sure that if there are some bad apples out there, that they're taken care of. So I think there's a recourse with the government agencies, as well as I looked at some of these building trade groups as well.
And I'd like to ask a broader question, if I could, and try to bring the global national crisis that we're seeing regarding the financial industry and whether or not regulations were enforced, rules, procedures, and so forth were followed, and bring that back home to Montana and have you talk about your views, what your administration, your respective administrations would be like when it comes to rules and regulations. Steve, do you want to start?
Sure, I will. Well, I mean, if we step back and look at the national level, we've dealt with a situation in the last 2 or 3 weeks that's of historic proportions. It reminds me of Will Rogers, who once said, "It's not the return on my money I'm looking for; it's the return of my money." And people are asking those kind of fundamental questions as our financial confidence has been shaken as a nation. And I'm glad to see we've got bipartisan leadership in Washington the last 48 hours working to put together something, some legislation, a bill here that can help restore stability to our markets. I think it comes down to there was some poor oversight at the highest levels in some of these organizations that we got in a situation with the subprimes and people who had too much debt, looseness in loan regulations and created problems. And that needs to be addressed. I'm also concerned, though, as I'm hearing from many Montanans, is there has to be accountability with some of the individuals who are walking away with golden parachutes and left with the taxpayers holding the bag. And it takes away the free enterprise nature of our country, which says that if you take risk, you also have to take the downside or the upside in that. And we want to make sure that people are held accountable who've made some very poor decisions and have resulted in this financial crisis.
John.
Yes, Jackie, here in the state of Montana, we regulate the banking industry, and we are fortunate. We have a banking community that do diligence when they lend money. We don't have bankers that have lent money to people that don't have proven sources of income and an ability to service that debt. We don't have a financial meltdown in Montana. The state of Montana itself has never been in better shape financially than we are today. The state is secure financially. Our banking community has done a good job. They've not participated in subprime lending practices. So I can assure the people of Montana that your money is safe in Montana banks. And
I have to say, though, I'm sorry, Jim, Republicans have taken a pounding on this issue, and you're both Republicans, for promoting less government regulation, promoting the free market. And I'd like for both of you to address that. Because it was that lack of oversight, that turning of the head, and just allowing greed, unchecked, to basically topple this nation financially. And we don't know yet what the impact is going to be on the taxpayers, which we have been talking about. Yeah. And not just the taxpayers in states like Florida, Nevada. Montana taxpayers may also feel some pain.
Well, Jackie, I don't think that the question of greed is one that wears a political party label. I think this is something we all have to be concerned about. Am I asking for too much? Am I being greedy? Are my expectations real? I don't believe that you can say this is the fault of the Republican Party. I think it's a fault of just a greedy nature that I think some of us have to constantly fight.
And Jack, let me say this too. I think it's early at the moment. It depends on who you listen to, who's taking the pounding. I think it's important to step back right now and solve the problem. Number two, then we'll do an autopsy and figure out how we got here in the first place. We've got to restore stability as step one. Step two is get to root cause analysis and find out where it was. Because there's a lot of regulations out there. They were either not followed, not enforced, perhaps some poor regulations. That investigation will come. We know that. I think it's premature to talk about who's getting pounded and what. That depends on who you listen to.
Jim, did you have a follow-up?
No, I'll restrain myself. I have a personal... I was discussing this issue in the foyer with these two gentlemen before we started, and it's just that the point I was trying to make is that I played by the rules, and I expect that the rest of the world has to play by the rules. It seems now, though, that the rules are being changed for certain entities. And quite frankly, I can't stomach that. And I can't stomach the idea that they're going to send $1 trillion worth of debt to my grandchildren who have yet to be born.
In case you're just joining us, you're listening to Yellowstone Public Radio and a debate between the candidates for Lieutenant Governor. If you have a question you'd like to join in on this conversation, in Billings 657-2941. 1-800-441-2941. You can also email your question. Just go to our website, ypradio.org. Let's go now to a caller. Sarah from Billings is on the line, and she has a question about prisons and our correction system. Sarah.
Yeah, Jim, maybe you ought to run for public office.
No, ma'am.
Anyway, I was just recently made aware of the incredible heavy glut of our prison system and getting worse. And Jim, I totally agree with you that if we continue down the same path that has happened in the past since Mark Roscoe, our taxpayers, our future generations will be bankrupt before they're even born. So my question is with a $141 million that was given to the prison systems last year, and a 70% failure rate, and with the CCA, which is the private prison, theirs is a 90% failure rate. What would either one of you do to turn that around to where we have can actually get our people plugged back into being an asset to the state of Montana instead of a liability?
Yeah, I can start off with that one too.
Certainly, Steve.
It's a big issue, and you look at the trends here. We can't keep building more prisons at the cost of in Montana $94,000 per year for an inmate at Deer Lodge. It's cheaper to send them to college and pay their tuition and put them in the dorm rooms and send them to Deer Lodge. And so we're taking a very productive part of society in terms of educating our children, and then we're having to pay for an unproductive part of our society here in terms of the corrections. I mean, clearly we have to continue to move in community-based type programs that for some situations that are more cost-effective and have better rates of reform. Having said that, there are people you have to take off the street, like it or not. There are predators out there. As a father of 4 children, I don't want to see some of these people they don't belong in community programs. They belong behind bars. So there's a balance here between the public safety as well as reform, and we need to be moving more in partnership. I look at what, for example, Tom Siebel did with the meth program. Great example, seeing a 70% reduction in meth usage. It's focusing on the prevention side here, and we've got to get our leaders in Helena, legislators, executive branch, forward-thinking here and looking at how do you prevent this to beginning. It comes back to family unit as well. I mean, there's some really core issues in our society today that eventually you don't see it in 1 year, but you see it 18 years down the road in terms of the fruit that it bears.
Well, I happen to know something about the correction system. When we were elected in 2004, the governor established a correction advisory council. I'm chairman of that council, and we met to address that very question of how do we get our arms around this growing prison population. The first thing we discovered is that about 90% of the people that are in prison are there because of problems they have with drugs and alcohol. Of that, about 50% of them are mentally ill. So our focus has been to develop community correction systems. Our system has also allowed for the development of meth treatment facilities. It has developed systems that allow for the treatment of alcoholics and drug users. And you know, we're getting positive results. The recidivism rate is falling off. And I don't know where Steve gets the number $94,000 to incarcerate someone. Our numbers tell us that it's closer to $36,000 to incarcerate someone. But whatever the number, we want to restore lives. We know that for the most part, these people will return to our communities. We want them returned well, and if their problems are focused on drug and alcohol issues, let's cure their addiction. Let's let them learn how to live productive and full lives without drugs and alcohol. And that's what we're focusing on. And I think we're getting some good results.
Steve, do you want to talk about where you got your figure?
I just got the figures here in the fact books I have here. You know, the point on the preventions, though, is I think we need to continue to look for ways to link arms not only with the existing state institutions, but with the private sector. Again, I look at the Montana meth program that was put in place, one of the most effective programs in terms of prevention, as John said, because of drug and alcohol problems in the state. Interesting enough, it was led by somebody who was a charitable person, a philanthropic cause. I think that says a lot here, too, around what we could do, another program from the state.
Jim.
I'd like maybe if both of you gentlemen would talk a little more about mental health and the problems that we have with that. The thing that bothers me most about our community-based services is that people who have mental health problems and are monitored, they're taking their medications, they can function more or less in our society. However, we have repeated examples of people who fall through the cracks, no longer take their medications, and then they either end up in our emergency rooms, which are extremely expensive, or they end up in our jails, which again are extremely expensive. And I know that this idea is probably not going to be well received in the community, but I really do think that there are some people who need to be institutionalized for their good, for their family's good, and for the public good. And I was wondering if you gentlemen would like to take and address that maybe philosophically rather than in sort of practical terms of cost, because I really think that some avoided cost is something that we need to address too, and by having people who clearly should be institutionalized should be there.
Well, I agree, Jim. There are people who we just aren't going to make well, and we have to provide space for them. We have to provide care for them. But our administration, in this last budget, set aside $55 million that was given to the Department of Public Health and Human Services to develop programs for people who have mental health issues, for people who have drug and alcohol issues. It's an investment in human beings whose lives can be made well, and we have hope that more people will be made well than not. I remember in the 2003 session of our legislature, we were in the final days of the session voting on House Bill 2, and I stood in opposition of House Bill 2 because they did not include monies for the purchase of drugs for our mentally ill. We know that if they're able to stabilize their lives with pharmaceuticals, they can have productive lives, they can go to work each day, and if they're not able to stabilize their lives with drugs, they do harm to themselves, they do harm to their neighbor, they wind up in our hospital emergency rooms, and they wind up in our jails. We have to provide expensive backside care for them. It's far less expensive and far more humane to take care of these issues up front.
Steve.
Yeah, just briefly on that, and a lot more to add, but I think we have to look beyond just government solutions here to this problem. It's depression and mental illness. It's one of these sometimes swept underneath the rug issues. It's a very serious issue in our nation, in our state. We see it. Society is growing increasingly more complex. There's more pressures in life today. The speed of life is picking up, whether we like it or not. But I guess I just would philosophically believe we have to keep looking at the root cause issues here, and there will be some solutions that government will provide, and we need to have some people off the streets. But then I think there's a compassionate view here too, with looking for the faith-based initiatives, the wonderful churches and other faith-based issues across the state that can really help people in need here. They're dealing with depression. That's not the only answer, but just an example. We can reach out with charitable groups to also assist and help carry this load.
We have, let's go to a caller. Joy from Red Lodge is on the line, and I believe she wants to continue on the topic of corrections and recidivism and reform. Joy.
Yes, my question is related to the answer that was just given a little bit ago. If it is true that you want to return inmates back into society well and healthy, then why is our system punishment-based instead of incentive-based? And also, anyone who tries to advocate for better conditions for inmates, it often results in retaliation against inmates.
John, do you want to take that?
Well, Joy, I'm not aware of retaliation to inmates who might protest treatment. We're not aware of it. If you have a specific case that you know of where an inmate was punished because he asked some questions, I want to know about it, and we'll have that investigated. The whole correctional system is built around the notion that if you break the law, if you do a crime, you're going to have to do some time. and it's just the way it is. Now, we want to deal with the root cause of why somebody steps out of bounds, why somebody breaks the law. And as I said earlier, we found that about 90% of the people that break the law do so because of drug and alcohol abuse. We want to treat the problem. We want to treat mental illness. We want to have people well and productive and living full and happy lives.
Steve.
Yeah, I mean, can't disagree with those comments. That clearly prevention is worth a pound of cure, an ounce of prevention. And I too have concerns and be looking for what the leadership and thinking in our state around how do you increase the reform rates, how do we reduce the costs here, what it's taking to in correction and so forth. So I just a big believer here in looking at what the core issue is, and prevention is always a better path here than spending money building brick and mortar and bars.
I'd like to get to a couple, two email questions if I could before, if you can believe it, we're getting closer to your closing statements here. Bill from Billings asks, what are your plans for education in the next 4 years? And more specifically, would you support implementing the one laptop per child program in Montana to give each student a personal computer inexpensively? I guess, Steve, would you like to tackle that first?
Sure, I will. Well, I speak from personal experience. I went to the public schools, kindergarten through high school in Bozeman, and I'm a Bobcat, and my dad's a Grizzly. So there's the bipartisan cat Grizz in my family. But I know John's a Grizz, and I'm a Bobcat. But my dad was a Grizz, actually with John Bohlinger at Missoula years ago. So we go back a lot of years. But, I mean, higher ed is absolutely essential in supporting it in this state. And I say that as one who runs a high-tech company in Montana who is dependent upon graduates from the university systems here in Montana to keep our business moving forward. Half of our employees in Bozeman are graduates of the Montana University system. And we're located about a mile away from Montana State University, but we have graduates from all the universities in the state. So it's not a question of support. It's an essential part, certainly for me, growing up and getting a start in life, and to keep our company and our economy going here in Montana. So it's I think that the game needs to shift, though, in terms of how we fund. I mean, we're sitting here in lawsuits right now in K through 12. There's debates about how we fund higher ed. I think clearly the natural resources is one of those keys to unlock in our state, of oil and gas, like we look just south of Wyoming, where they're building new schools and funding education more effectively than we are up here in Montana, where it's fundamentally on the backs of property taxpayers. As far as the laptop program, I'd be interested to look at that. I'm always leery about giving kids something there. I'd like to rather see kids go off and have to earn it to own their laptop. I guess if it was in my family, I'm going to make my kids have to go out and mow some lawns before I'm going to give them a laptop.
John.
Yes. Well, Bill, your question is one that resonates well with us. We've asked ourselves, what can we do to move this economy forward? And the way we do so is to educate our people. If we have the best educated workforce, these are the ones that are going to be employed. What have we done as an administration specifically to benefit our students? One, we've increased funding for K-12 by 26% since 2005. Two, the governor established in his first budget in 2005 a scholarship program called Best and Brightest for anyone that has a 3.5 GPA, graduate from a certified high school, is eligible for a $1,000 scholarship. We've been awarding about 3,000 of those a year since we've taken office. In addition, we in this last session, 2007, the governor froze college tuition increases. He put a cap on it. And this cost $50 million, but it's a step that was made to make college more affordable for more Montanans. And that's just the beginning. We're moving forward with a budget and proposals that will provide additional resources, financial resources for education.
We have just a couple minutes left, but Jim, you wanted to ask, I guess, a final question.
I do. Montana's largest natural resource industry is agriculture, and I admit that I'm prejudiced in their favor, having covered them for 25 years. I was wondering if either one of you have an idea of what we might do to increase value-added processing in Montana of our bulk commodities so that more of the value stays here in Montana, realizing, of course, that we're captive to transportation.
Yeah, well, I start off with that one there, Jim. We've got a great example of that right outside of Bozeman with Dean Folkford in Wheat, Montana.
Yep.
There's an example there where you sit there and get your sandwich at Wheat, Montana, which we all do as we take our drives around the state, and you can see what can be done here. And I think what Dean has done there is just one small example.
It's a great model.
It absolutely is. And it's key for us, especially the challenges we're facing in agriculture today here with skyrocketing fuel prices, skyrocketing fertilizer prices. Yeah, commodity prices are better than they were years ago, but our expenses are higher right now. Bottom line is we're still struggling here in the farm and ag community. Let me just say this, though, too. We're having to spend $4 to $6 million now because we lost our brucellosis-free status as well. That's a big issue in our state, and it's unfortunate that happened, but it has happened, and that's money right out of the pockets of ranchers who are struggling right now to make a go of it with $4.50 a gallon diesel prices.
John.
Well, let me say this in response to the question you posed, Jim. When Brian Schweitzer was elected governor, we had a little less than $600 million in commodity exports. Governor Schweitzer is a man that is seeking new markets for Montana ag products. And this last year, we exported in excess of $1.6 billion. We had a $1 billion increase in our commodity exports. It's come about because Governor Schweitzer has developed new markets.
And because commodity prices went right through the ceiling.
Well, that helped too, Jim. But somebody's out there selling the concept of buying Montana wheat or grain products, buying Montana ag or farm products. But I feel that we need to find new ways to add value to Montana products. I mean, Wheat Montana is a wonderful example, and we just congratulate Dean and his efforts. But there is more that can be done, and we must turn over all the stones to get that done.
Well, with that, we're going to have to end the round of questionings from both here in studio as well as the email and the telephone questions, because we want to give you both 2 minutes at least to give some closing remarks as you are the candidates for Lieutenant Governor. And I don't know that we set an order for who will go first. I don't know if there's a particular volunteer.
Go ahead, John.
Well, all right. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, so with that, John Bohlinger, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Jackie. Thanks for the opportunity to visit with your radio audience and respond to the questions that have been raised this evening. Let me say this, as Governor Schweitzer is fond of saying, Montana is on the move. Now, how do we measure that? Well, we measure it in terms of such things as the 7th fastest growing economy in the country over the past 3.5 years. One of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. This summer, it was down to around 3%. Today, it's up a little, but it's still at least 2 percentage points under the national average. Montana is creating more jobs. In fact, we've been creating 1,300 jobs a month, over 56,000 new taxpayers in Montana since we took office. And it's come about because this governor has found new investors in Montana's economy. Governor Schweitzer has brought the financial resources that will open the Roundup mine. They're putting $450 million into the Roundup mine. They're starting to build the 35-mile rail track that will take this coal to Midwest markets. He's brought $1 billion worth of wind energy to Montana, expanding tax bases and providing opportunity for Montanans. So it's a combination, and it's one that we've been working on together, and we're very grateful. And hopefully the people of Montana will give us another chance to finish the job.
All right. Thank you very much, John Bohlinger. Steve.
Well, thank you, Jackie. And John is a gentleman, and John has known our family, I think, for 50 years, I believe. My dad and John were Billings Senior Marine Corps and Grizz together.
Absolutely.
And
He's
so
a good man, and he built my home.
And built John's home. And so I really, our family has a lot of respect for John Bohlinger. And so John is not my issue here tonight. We're going to talk about our governor, Governor Schweitzer. And I think it's about contrasting, because we have a choice right now between Senator Brown and Brian Schweitzer. Elections are about the future. It's also looking back around the records of the past. And on the economy, I do wish that Brian Schweitzer spent a little more time around kitchen tables in Montana versus traveling out to his trial lawyers' meetings and being on the Bill Maher show and so forth. A little more time back here in Montana sipping coffee. He's going to find out that the unemployment rate is up 42%. The rate is in the last 14 months. It went from 3.1% to 4.4%. People are starting to lose their jobs here in Montana. Our wages, according to the governor's own report, are ranked 50th, dead last, wages per job in the nation. So we may be creating some jobs, but they're low-paying jobs. And I've had the privilege of working for a company that's creating jobs averaging $75,000 a year in Bozeman, Montana. So it's not just jobs, but high-paying jobs is what we need. In terms of Montana on the move, there's teachers leaving the state. They're moving right out of Montana. They're going to Wyoming. There's oil rigs going to North Dakota. And so I take a little bit of an issue with Brian Schweitzer's claims. I think he would claim that the sun came up every day during his administration, take credit for it, the way he runs around talking about his different successes. On energy, our oil production is down 14%. The Roundup mine was permitted by Stan Stevens and put in place by Judy Martz. That's not a Brian Schweitzer accomplishment. And we've seen the largest increase in state spending in the history of our state. And on the ethics issue, we've seen a pattern with Brian Schweitzer of bullying and of ethics issues with the trial lawyers, with the public service announcements. Jesse Laslovich himself called the governor a bully. And so there's a real noise out there in Montana about the persona of the governor, that we need to restore leadership about people who are for serving the people and not their own political self-interest.
I wish we had more time, because I'd like to respond to the issues that you've raised, Steve, but we're getting the signal that this is over.
And we are out of time because of the nature of our programming. But I want to thank you two gentlemen for coming in and answering questions, again, from those of us in studio as well as email and by telephone. Want to thank Steve Daines once again, running mate of Roy Brown, the Republican candidate for governor, and also like to say thank you to John Bohlinger, the Republican, who is the current lieutenant governor to Democrat Brian Schweitzer. I'd like to thank Jim Gransbury for being once again in the studio this evening.
My pleasure.
And once again, thank you to our technical team, very talented team, Ken Siebert, and tonight, Art Hooker. Good night.